Hi, welcome back. This is Beersborn. In today's video, we're going to start talking about the environment that our game takes place in. Because right now, we have a main character, we have an enemy here on the screen, but they're just kind of floating in a white void, right? We don't have a setting, we don't have a world that these players are existing in right now. So we're going to start creating that today. And the first step is going to be making a background. Now, what we want to think about is that because this is a top-down game, meaning that the view is as if we are above looking down at the characters from above, the background's going to be the ground. We want to come up with a texture that represents what the ground is that this character is standing on. Maybe that's dirt, or grass, or stone, or maybe it's a wooden floor, or whatever. We're going to do something called a tiled background. And what that means, let me show you here. I have a tiled background set into this example. A tiled background is one single square of background texture, but no matter how big I stretch it out, it repeats that tile in a seamless way. Now, this tile is actually only one square, but as I stretch it out, it repeats that square in a way that you can't even tell it's a repeating pattern. The reason why we do it this way is because it saves a lot of memory. Rather than having just one giant sprite that covers the whole screen, this is a small sprite that's repeating. It also is more dynamic because it allows us to stretch out the background to whatever size we want the level to be. So we're going to come up with that texture first. We're going to do that in Piskel. So let's open up Piskel, and there's a couple things I want to point out about this. First is the size. Now, it can be whatever size you want as long as it's a square, but I recommend going like 128 by 128. I think that's a good amount of detail for the game that we're creating, rather than a 32 by 32 square, because that might be a little bit too small, a little bit too repetitive. Now, the other thing that I'm going to point out is that there is a mode in Piskel that is especially for making these backgrounds. If you click on the preferences, which is the gear over on the top right menu, you'll see an option for tile mode. There's miscellaneous, grid, and then tile mode. If you click the box to enable the tile mode, what that does is it shows you the repeating pattern as you're making it. So like say I draw something in my main square, say I'm going to draw like a little cobblestone street for my background. It instantly draws the repeating pattern on the other squares around it. So you can kind of get a sense like, okay, I'm going to draw these stones and you'll see how they look as they repeat in that pattern. But what's really handy is say you have a stone that goes off the side of the image. Like here, I have a stone that goes to here. I can just move over to the left and continue that stone over here. That's so important because having pieces of your texture that go off the border of the page and then continue on the other side makes this texture repeat seamlessly. You can't even tell that it's repeating. So if I draw all these little stones here, I'll just take a second and finish this up. When you zoom out, you can't even really tell that it's a repeating texture. Now, it's not a very good texture, but you can see what I'm saying, right? You can't tell where one starts and the other one begins. So our first step is simply going to be to make that texture. I have an example here of one that I've already made of kind of a dirt texture, right? So I have like a kind of a dried, cracked dirt look. If I turn on the tile mode, you can't even really tell where the different tiles start and stop. Great. So the first step is to make that texture. Now, once you've made that texture, we're going to move on to the second step now. We're going to put it into Construct, and there's a couple things we have to do to make this work effectively. First, we're going to go to our Layers window. Now, we've never talked about layers before. It's a way of organizing the different objects that are in your game. To start with, we want to add a new layer. Now, if you don't see the Layers window there, you have to go up to Menu, and you click on View, and then under Bars, you should see one that says Layers. So check that off. If it's not visible, that'll bring it up. What we're going to do is we're going to right-click down in our Layers window, and we're going to add a layer at the bottom. And I'm going to call this layer Background. This is going to be the layer specifically for our background. Now I'm going to go over here into my white space in my layout. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to insert a new object. But instead of it being a sprite this time, I'm going to do a tiled background. Now, if you click on it once, you can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine Dirt Background. And then insert it, click anywhere you want, and let's load in that sprite that we've just created. Here it is. Now I can close the animations editor and you'll notice that nothing pops up. It looks like it should be there, but it's empty. The reason why is because layer 0 is actually covered with a white background. We have our characters, our enemies, and a white background. So in order to make the background of layer 0 transparent, you have to click once on layer 0, and then over here on the left menu, you'll see an option for transparent. If you select that transparent box, it makes the background invisible. So now I can still see my objects that are on layer 0, and I can see through it to the background that's beneath it. So here's my tiled background. What I want to do is zoom out. And to zoom out, I'm holding down the control key on my keyboard and the mouse wheel on my mouse, the scroll wheel. And I'm going to simply take that tiled background, put it up in the corner, and stretch it out to fill the whole space of my layout. Now, you'll notice a little dotted line here. That represents the view of your screen. Your monitor can only see that much of the level at one time. But if you zoom out even more, you'll see a thicker black outline in the rectangle that represents the dimensions of the level. We're going to stretch out that background to cover the entirety of the layout. So from the top left to the bottom right of that thicker black rectangle, there's our background. Now, the last thing I want to do here is I'm going to lock the background layer. And to do that, you just simply click on the little lock that's next to where it says background. If it's black, that means it's locked. If it's white or empty, that means it's unlocked. The reason why we want to lock it is because that prevents us from accidentally clicking on it, which is nice because it covers the whole space. So if you don't have it locked, it's really hard to click on anything because you end up clicking on the background instead. So I recommend locking it. Test it out, see how the background looks. If you want to make any adjustments to your background, you can simply unlock it, double click on it, and then load a new sprite in and see how it looks. Great, we'll leave it at that today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.